Okay, so ready to dive in? Today, we're going to be exploring Don't Believe Everything You Think by Joseph Nguyen.
Hmm.
And this book is really about getting to the root of why we suffer
Right.
and how to find more peace in our lives. Have you ever found yourself really stressing over something and you're like, why am I letting this get to me?
All the time.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's something we can all relate to, right?
Yeah.
It's so easy to get caught up in those thought loops and anxieties.
Yeah. And it's funny because we often search for external solutions to what are essentially internal struggles.
Absolutely. And that's where I think this book really shines a light on things.
Yeah, and Joseph, he's really honest in this book. He talks about trying everything, therapy, meditation, all that stuff, and still feeling stuck.
That's a really relatable starting point, right?
Totally. And it's from that place of feeling stuck that he stumbles upon this idea, and it's kind of like, whoa, it's so simple. It's not actually events themselves that cause suffering,
Right.
but our thoughts about them.
It's that classic cognitive behavioral therapy principle, but I feel like he goes a layer deeper.
Yeah.
Because he distinguishes between thoughts and then thinking itself.
Okay, I'm intrigued. Explain this to me.
Okay, so
I'm 5, because
Yeah.
I'm not sure I follow.
okay, so imagine ingredients in your kitchen, right?
Okay.
You're just there, they're neutral until you do something with them.
Mhm.
So thinking is like taking those ingredients and making a recipe, and sometimes
Okay.
it turns out great, and sometimes it's a total flop.
So is the thought I have a deadline,
Yes.
and the thinking is oh my God, I'm going to mess this up and my boss is going to hate me, and then my cat's going to judge me from the corner.
Exactly. That's where the suffering really festers. It's in that story
Okay.
that we weave around, like a pretty neutral thought in and of itself.
So then how do we turn off that thinking, though? Do we just become these emotionless robots? Because that doesn't sound like a fun way to live either.
Right. And that's a common misconception, I think, with this idea of non-thinking. It's not about becoming emotionless. Actually, he argues that our natural state is joy.
Interesting.
Think about babies. They're not born
Yeah.
stressed out, right? They're these little bundles of pure being
Yeah.
experiencing each moment as it is.
Okay, that makes sense. But I mean, we're not babies anymore. We have responsibilities, we have bills to pay, we have goals.
Right. And he's not saying that we shouldn't have goals.
Right.
He believes we should have goals, but he distinguishes between two different types of goals.
Mm.
Those that are fueled by desperation and those that are ignited by inspiration.
Okay, now we're talking. So, break that down. What does a desperation goal look like?
A desperation goal, it's going to feel heavy, like a means to an end. So, for example, I need to get this promotion so I can finally be happy.
Oh, I felt that.
Yes.
It's you're putting all your happiness on this external thing.
Exactly. Something that you may or may not even achieve.
Right. It's if I can just get this thing or achieve this thing, then I will finally allow myself to be happy.
Exactly.
Which is, oof, yeah.
Yeah.
So then what's the alternative?
The alternative is a goal that's rooted in inspiration, so it feels energizing. It's an end in itself.
Okay.
So, for example, it could be something like, I am so passionate about this project, even if it never makes $1 million,
Yeah.
because it just lights me up inside.
So it's you're finding the joy in the process of whatever it is you're doing, not just the outcome.
Exactly. And often you'll find that those inspired goals, they lead to the most unexpected and fulfilling outcomes anyway,
Interesting.
because you enter this flow state,
Yeah.
right? Where you're not overthinking, you're just creating, you're just being.
And that brings up flow states. He talks about, or you mentioned earlier, non-thinking, this idea.
Yes.
And then he connects that to something that seems kind of out of left field, unconditional love.
Right. It's one of the most, I think, beautiful points in the book. He talks about observing his girlfriend just loving him, unconditionally. There's no why needed. It just is. And he realized that so much of our love, whether it's for ourselves, our work, or other people, it's conditional. It's based on these external factors that can change.
So it's I love this job because it pays my bills, but what if I get laid off tomorrow?
Exactly. Or I love this creative project because other people are praising it.
Right. Or what if it stops getting likes?
Exactly. Right. It's conditional love.
Yeah.
It's hinging your well-being on factors that are ultimately outside of your control.
So interesting and kind of scary at the same time when you think about it.
It is. It is.
So then unconditional love is I don't know, what does that even look like in practice?
It's about showing up, whether it's in your work or in your relationships, purely for the joy of it.
Okay.
without needing external validation. It's about being present in the process, not attached to a specific outcome.
I love that. That's powerful. But like, how do we even begin to cultivate this like non-thinking state in everyday life? Because let's be real, most of us can't just drop everything and go meditate on a mountaintop.
Right. It's not about becoming a monk or anything like that. It's about making these conscious choices that support a calmer mind.
Okay.
And he calls this creating a non-thinking environment.
I love a good environment makeover, so I'm into this.
Right.
So how do we create that? Where do we even begin?
The first step is awareness.
Right.
So becoming aware of what are your triggers, what are the things that kind of send your mind into overdrive. For some people, it's certain foods, too much caffeine, maybe it's clutter in your living space, maybe it's certain people, or, endlessly scrolling through social media.
Okay, so if I notice that like every time I spend an hour on Instagram, I just feel terrible afterwards.
Exactly.
Maybe that's something to look at.
Maybe it's time to rethink that habit,
Okay.
right? It's about making these conscious choices about what you allow into your mental space.
So it's like curating a museum, but for our minds.
I love that.
Okay, so we identify those triggers, and then what? Do we just avoid them at all costs?
Not necessarily avoidance, but mindful engagement.
Okay.
So maybe instead of that late night social media scroll, you swap it out for a good book or a relaxing bath.
Right.
The key is to become aware of those things that trigger you and then make conscious choices that support a calmer, more peaceful state of being.
It's all about like taking back control of our inputs, both internal and external, which is, I love that, but I
Right.
think our listeners are probably like, okay, this all sounds great in theory,
Yes.
but give me something tangible. Give me something I can actually do. So what are some other ways to cultivate this aside from just like being aware of what our triggers are?
He talks about the power of activation rituals, which sounds very fancy.
Ooh, I love a good ritual. Tell me more.
So this is about starting your day in a way that promotes peace and presence rather than immediately getting sucked into the vortex of to-do lists and all the things that you have to get done that day.
Right, like the mental overwhelm.
Exactly.
The second you open your eyes.
Right. So it might be a morning meditation, a walk in nature, journaling, anything that helps you to connect with that quiet space within before you kind of get out into the world.
So instead of immediately letting the world dictate my mental state from the moment I wake up, I'm choosing how I want to start my day.
Exactly. You're setting the tone
Right.
for a more peaceful and productive day because you're starting from a place of presence and intention.
It's like building your day on a foundation of peace rather than a foundation of stress.
Exactly. And from that foundation, you're much more equipped to handle whatever challenges arise throughout the day.
Love it.
Right. You'll find you're less reactive to those external triggers, and you're more able to tap into that inner wisdom that he talks about.
This is amazing, and I'm sure our listeners are like, yes, I'm here for this, but I'm sure some are also thinking like, okay, this is great in theory, but what about when life gets really messy?
Yes.
Like, what about when I'm dealing with a job loss or a breakup or just like an existential crisis?
Right, the real nitty-gritty.
Exactly.
And that's where the real magic of his approach comes in.
Yeah.
Because he doesn't shy away from the reality of suffering,
Yeah.
He actually provides a framework for how do we navigate these challenges with greater grace and resilience. And that's what we're going to dive into in the next part of this deep dive.
I am so here for that. So for our listeners, get ready for even more practical tips and insights on how to apply this concept of non-thinking to even the messiest parts of life.
Stay tuned.
Stay tuned for part 2. Welcome back, you guys. I am still thinking about everything we talked about in the last part.
Yeah.
That whole idea of like activation rituals. I don't know, it's really stuck with me and I've been trying to implement it, like even just starting my day with a few minutes of meditation instead of immediately going for my phone.
Yeah.
And I gotta say, like, I can feel a difference.
It's amazing how these like small shifts in our routine can have these like ripple effects throughout our day.
Totally.
And speaking of small but powerful shifts, I thought it'd be interesting to kind of, in this part, dive a little deeper into how we can apply this idea of non-thinking to those inevitable challenges that life throws our way. Because let's face it, like no amount of meditation can completely erase the possibility of heartbreak or loss or just a good old-fashioned existential crisis. Right?
Preach. So how do we square this idea of non-thinking with like the messy reality of being human?
Right.
Because it's easy to say, don't believe everything you think when things are like going great in your life.
Right.
But when you're like in the thick of it,
Yes.
it feels a little different.
It's much harder to access that peaceful state
Right.
when you're in the midst of a challenge.
Totally.
And that's where the distinction between thoughts and thinking becomes even more crucial.
Okay.
Because those challenging emotions, like grief, anger, fear, those are all natural human experiences.
Right.
He's not advocating that we suppress those or deny them.
Right.
Instead, it's more about meeting those emotions with a sense of curiosity and compassion,
Okay.
rather than getting swept away by the stories our minds create around them.
So it's not about pretending like those difficult emotions don't exist. It's more about changing our relationship to them.
Yes, exactly.
Instead of getting lost in that mental spiral of why me? This isn't fair. This shouldn't be happening.
Yes.
It's more about just observing them.
Observing without judgment.
Without judgment, yeah.
Yeah, it's like, watching clouds drift by in the sky.
Okay.
We could acknowledge their presence without, getting drenched in the rain.
Okay, that's such a good visual.
Right. We can observe those thoughts and feelings without letting them dictate our actions, without letting them define our experience.
Okay, that makes sense, but how do you actually do that?
Right.
Because it's one thing to say observe your thoughts. It's another to actually quiet that inner critic that just wants to give a running commentary on every single emotion.
It takes practice.
Okay.
But he offers some really tangible tools for cultivating that kind of mindful awareness.
Okay, like what?
One of the techniques he talks about is journaling.
Okay.
And the way he suggests doing it is, when you notice those negative thoughts arising, just take some time to actually write them down.
Okay.
And then, here's the key, question their validity.
So you're cross-examining your own inner critic.
Exactly.
I love that.
Right. So ask yourself, is this thought actually true? What evidence do I have to support this thought?
Yeah.
How would I feel if I chose to let go of this thought?
So you're challenging those deeply ingrained beliefs that we have that are often the root of so much of our suffering.
Precisely. And sometimes even just the act of writing those thoughts down can help us to detach from them a little bit.
Totally.
To see them as these mental events rather than absolute truths.
It's you're taking them from swirling around in your head and you're putting them down on paper where you can kind of look at them with a little more objectivity.
Exactly. And once we start to question those limiting beliefs, we start to create space for new possibilities to emerge.
Ooh, I like that.
We open ourselves up to the realization that our thoughts are not facts. They're simply mental events that, we have the power to choose.
Okay, and this actually makes me think about something you mentioned in the last part. This idea of inner wisdom or intuition.
Yes.
How does that play into navigating those difficult emotions and those challenging situations?
I love that you asked that because that's where it gets, I think, even more interesting. Because he believes that, our intuition actually speaks the loudest when we're going through those tough times.
Interesting.
He suggests that our intuition is like a compass.
Okay.
That's always pointing us towards our highest good, even when we feel, completely lost and uncertain.
So it's even when our logical minds are freaking out, our intuition still knows the way.
Yes, exactly.
Okay.
But in order to access that inner wisdom, we need to quiet the mental noise, right?
Yeah.
We need to create space for those kind of intuitive nudges to come through.
Right.
And that's where non-thinking comes in.
Okay, so by letting go of that or our attachment to those negative thought patterns, we're then creating space for our intuition to come through and actually lead us.
Lead us to a more peaceful and fulfilling path.
I love that, but what does that actually look like in practice?
Right.
Because I feel that's something I've really struggled with is okay, is this my intuition talking or am I just telling myself what I want to hear?
That's such a great question. And he actually addresses this directly in the book.
Okay.
He says that, our intuition, it often speaks in a language that's different from our rational minds. So it might not always make logical sense.
Right. Okay.
It might come through as a feeling in our gut, a sudden burst of inspiration,
Yeah.
a dream, even a sense of synchronicity in our lives.
Oh, so those aha moments when you're oh my God, the solution just
Yes.
appeared out of nowhere, or when you bump into the right person at the right time?
Yes. Those synchronicities.
Okay.
Those moments that feel divinely orchestrated, he says, pay attention to those.
Interesting.
They often hold clues about the path that we're meant to be on.
Mm-hmm.
And he also emphasizes the importance of paying attention to our dreams.
Dreams are so fascinating to me, but I feel they're so elusive.
They are. And he actually recommends keeping a dream journal by your bed.
Okay.
And just, when you wake up, jotting down whatever you remember from your dreams, even if they don't make sense, even if it's just like fragments and images.
Interesting.
He believes that dreams often communicate in symbols and metaphors.
Okay.
So it's like bypassing our conscious minds
Oh, interesting.
to deliver these messages
Mm-hmm.
from, our subconscious or even our higher selves.
So it's like they're this like direct line to our intuition in a way.
Yes, exactly.
That's less filtered by all of the like,
Oh, noise.
yeah, all the noise and the anxieties and the overthinking of our everyday like conscious minds.
Exactly.
That's so cool.
Right.
It makes me think about those times when I've like had a gut feeling about something
Yeah.
and then ignored it because it didn't make sense logically. And then it's like things kind of blew up in my face and it's like, I should have listened to my intuition.
Yes, we've all been there, haven't we?
Yes.
But,
Yup.
the more we practice listening to those intuitive nudges,
Right.
the easier it becomes to discern them
Right.
from just our own, mental chatter or our wishful thinking.
It's like building a muscle. The more you use it, the stronger it gets.
Exactly.
Okay, this is really, really good stuff.
Good. I'm glad it's resonating.
It is. But I'm also curious about how we can apply this non-thinking concept to our relationships with others.
Mm-hmm.
Because, those can be
Oh, absolutely.
some of the most like challenging and rewarding relationships in our lives.
Yeah, for sure.
Okay.
He actually dedicates a significant portion of the book to this very topic.
Okay.
Because he argues that our relationships with other people are a direct reflection of the relationship we have with ourselves.
Ooh, that's deep. Okay.
Right.
Yeah.
So if we're constantly caught up in our own negative thoughts and our limiting beliefs about ourselves,
Yeah.
those patterns are going to inevitably seep into our interactions with others.
So our like inner world shapes our outer world.
Exactly. So if we're constantly criticizing ourselves,
Right.
we're more likely to criticize those around us.
Right.
If we're judging ourselves really harshly, we're more likely to judge other people really harshly.
It's like those patterns of negative thinking become self-fulfilling prophecies in our relationships.
Yes, precisely.
Wow.
But the good news is...
Okay, good. Because I was going to say, it was
Okay.
getting a little dark for a second.
Yeah.
Okay, so there's good news.
There is. The good news is that non-thinking offers us a path to break free from those destructive patterns.
Okay.
Because as we cultivate, greater self-awareness and compassion for ourselves,
Yeah.
we naturally become more compassionate and understanding in our relationships with others.
It's like that compassion kind of spills over into every area of our lives.
Yes, I love that. That's a beautiful way to put it.
Okay, this is really fascinating stuff.
Good.
But I also want to know, like, how can we apply this to, like, specific relationship challenges?
Yes.
Like communication breakdowns or,
Conflict.
all that fun stuff.
Yes, and that is exactly what we're going to get into
Oh, good.
in the final part of this deep dive,
Oh.
along with his insights on how non-thinking can actually lead us to a more profound sense of purpose and fulfillment in all areas of our lives, not just in our relationships.
Okay, I'm very intrigued. So for our listeners, stay tuned because in part 3, we are going to be tying all of these threads together.
Yes.
And hopefully leaving you with some actionable takeaways that you can apply to your own life and your own journey.
Sounds good.
Stay tuned for part 3. All right, so we are back for the final part of our deep dive into Don't Believe Everything You Think.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel like we've covered so much already, like
We have.
understanding the root of suffering, creating that non-thinking environment, tapping into our intuition.
Mm-hmm.
But I have a feeling Joseph saved some of his like juiciest insights for this last part.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, these insights really get to the heart of what it means to live a more peaceful and fulfilling life. And one of the things that really struck me was his assertion that nothing is inherently good or bad, but thinking makes it so.
Okay, break that down for me. Because on the surface level, that's a little hard to swallow, right? Surely some things are just objectively bad.
Right, and that's kind of what our minds want us to believe.
Right.
Right, we love to label things.
Totally.
To categorize our experiences as good or bad, right or wrong.
Yeah.
And he's really challenging us to look beyond those labels
Yeah.
and recognize that it's actually our thinking that assigns those values.
So it's not the event itself, it's our interpretation of it
Exactly.
that determines whether we perceive it as good or bad.
Yes, precisely. And he uses this great analogy of a piano.
Okay.
He says, the piano itself, it doesn't have wrong keys. Each key simply produces a different sound.
Right.
It's only when we impose a specific melody or a chord progression that we then judge certain notes as being like, oh, that one's wrong.
Right.
Because it doesn't fit within this like desired pattern.
Okay, that makes sense.
Right.
So we're essentially doing that with like life, right?
Exactly.
Like something happens that's neutral. Could be a job loss, could be a traffic jam, could be a rainy day.
Wow.
And then our mind comes in and is like, this is bad, this is wrong, this is unfair.
Exactly. That's when the suffering kicks in.
Right.
Not because of the event itself, but because of the story
The story we've created around it.
that we've created around it in our minds.
Okay, so then how do we break free from that? Are we just like walking around pretending that everything is sunshine and rainbows even when it's not?
No, not at all.
Okay.
It's not about denying the reality of our experiences, but it's more about like meeting them with a sense of neutrality.
Okay.
So instead of immediately slapping a label on something and being like, this is bad, we can just simply observe it, acknowledge it,
Yeah.
and then choose how we want to respond.
This makes me think about those times where, like, I've gotten so stressed out about something,
Yeah.
like maybe I missed a deadline, and then later I'm like, that wasn't even a big deal. Why was I making it such a big deal?
Exactly. It was your thinking. That turned it into a crisis.
It really was. Wow.
Right.
Okay.
So by cultivating that mindful awareness, we realize, like, oh, I actually have a choice here.
Okay.
I can choose to respond from a place of peace rather than just, like, immediate reactivity.
I love that. And this kind of goes back to, what we were talking about in the earlier parts about like creating that non-thinking environment.
Exactly.
It's about like minimizing the external things that are already like sending our minds into overdrive, and then also cultivating the practices that help us access like that inner stillness.
Yes, absolutely. And it's an ongoing practice. It's not a one-time fix.
Right, because our minds are really good at like creating those negative thought loops.
They are. They're very creative, those minds of ours.
They are, but if we can learn to just like observe those thoughts without judgment, without getting like swept up in the drama of them,
Yes.
then we can start to like create a more peaceful and joyful reality, both internally and externally.
Exactly. And that actually brings us to another really crucial aspect of his approach, and that's the importance of cultivating unconditional love.
Okay.
Not just for ourselves, but for others as well.
We've been like dancing around this topic, I feel like, throughout this whole deep dive.
We have.
So like, why is unconditional love so important to this whole like non-thinking equation?
Because when we approach ourselves and others with unconditional love, we're essentially creating this space of acceptance and compassion
Okay.
that allows us to show up more authentically
Yeah.
without the need for masks or pretenses. And it's from that place of authenticity that we can truly connect with, our own inner peace and with the world around us.
So it's like letting go of those judgments that we have, both of ourselves and others,
Yeah.
and just like embracing the messy, imperfect beauty of being human.
Yes, exactly. And that includes embracing the messy, imperfect beauty of our own minds.
Okay.
Because here's the thing, even when we're like striving for this state of non-thinking, there are still going to be thoughts. Like that's the nature of having a human brain.
Okay, yeah, that's fair.
It's not about erasing our thoughts entirely.
Right, it's more about changing our relationship to them.
Exactly. And that's actually where his final insight comes in, this idea that clarity is the nature of our minds.
Ooh. I like that, but what does that mean? Like, are we all just walking around with these like perfectly clear minds that are like buried under like a pile of mental clutter?
In essence, yes. He's arguing that peace, love, joy, these are not things that we need to like achieve or earn, but rather they're our natural state of being.
Wow.
It's our thinking, it's our clinging to those negative thought patterns that obscures that innate clarity.
So it's not about like striving for peace. It's about letting go of the thoughts that are blocking us from the peace that's already there.
Yes, precisely.
I love that.
He compares it to like a clear, still lake,
Okay.
Our thinking is like all the mud that gets stirred up, creating all this like turbidity.
Yeah.
But if we allow that mud to settle, the lake naturally returns to its pristine state.
Wow, that's such a powerful image.
So
So we just have to like let the mud settle.
let the mud settle.
No, okay. Wow, this has been quite the deep dive.
I asked.
Joseph's book really does offer like a roadmap for navigating like all the complexities of life, but with more awareness, more compassion, more peace.
Absolutely.
What's like the one key takeaway that you're hoping our listeners walk away with today?
I hope they remember that they are not their thoughts.
Ooh.
They have the power to choose which thoughts they engage with, which thoughts they let go of, and by making those conscious choices that support their well-being, they can create a life of greater peace, purpose, and joy.
Beautifully said. And as Joseph reminds us, we are ever only one thought, one insight away from experiencing life differently.
So true.
This deep dive has been truly transformative, and I hope it's inspired you, our amazing listeners, to embark on your own journeys of self-discovery and inner peace. Until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep diving deep.